So, former NASCAR CEO Brian France has decided that taking a breathalyzer to court is a good idea.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Yes, you may remember a couple of months ago, a story broke just after the Watkins Glen NASCAR race that current NASCAR CEO, or at least then current NASCAR CEO, Brian France was under arrest with charges of DUI and possession of oxycodone. Now, I did a video about that at the time, and at the time, I certainly painted a sympathetic picture towards Brian France. I felt the real villains in the situation were the ones surrounding him, the ones who were not getting him help, the ones who were perhaps turning a blind eye to an obvious addiction problem. I'm going to start hardening my stance on Brian France because of the fact that he has decided to plead not guilty to the charge of a 1.8 blood alcohol content and the possession, I assume, of oxycodone. And by the way, I'm well aware at this point that oxycodone is closer to heroin, not cocaine. Thanks, comment section, for that one. But this is an interesting development here, and certainly one that disappoints me quite a bit. Again, I was hoping to see Brian France turn his life around from here, but unfortunately, going and pursuing a not guilty plea on something like this seems to imply that there isn't a whole lot of remorse from that side of the fence in terms of what's going on, and that's a real shame. So how will this play out? Do you really think that Brian France is really going to end up in court for this? I suspect not. Usually what happens in sort of situations like this where a legal team will pursue something as kind of, I guess, small as this relatively, we're not talking murder here, thank God, we're talking DUI, especially when the client is quite wealthy and can bring in a huge team of expensive lawyers to a small municipality that maybe doesn't have the budget to hire a lawyer to fight them. A lot of times the judge will broker some sort of a plea deal, which would include probably a large fine to be paid to the town. The town's not going to mind. They're going to be like, well, thanks, Brian France. Thanks for your money. And then some sort of a community service sentence. I suspect if that is the case, Brian France will probably end up spending his community service time taking pictures at Kyle Petty's Victory Junction gang camp with some kids, and that'll be it. It won't be much of a punishment, if you can even consider that a punishment in the first place. The other possibility is if, for some reason, the judge decides to pursue this, take it to court, and then find out exactly whether or not Brian France is indeed guilty of the crimes he was arrested for at the scene of this incident. And there's even a possibility that Brian France gets off even better in that particular situation. There's always a potential of a mistrial, a hung jury, something that would essentially allow Brian France to get off scot-free. And if that's the case, we're talking about some doomsday scenarios for the people who were, I guess, somewhat celebrating the arrest of Brian France, thinking it would have removed him from the NASCAR picture. There's certainly a worst-case scenario here for NASCAR and NASCAR fans, particularly the ones that don't like Brian France, is that if he goes free, or if he pays some sort of a fine and a community service sentence without doing any jail time or any significant kind of penalty for this charge, he could be back in the CEO role of NASCAR as early as next year, and maybe even sooner than that, depending on how quickly the legal process manages to clean itself up. Now, I say that, but at the same token, it seems like NASCAR isn't necessarily confident in the ability of Brian France to win this court case against the breathalyzer, the breathalyzer that definitely has a bias against Brian France and totally was lying about his blood alcohol content. They, and this has been a rumor since the Indianapolis round of the NASCAR championship, have apparently been pursuing IndyCar higher up and essentially the guy who runs IndyCar day to day, Jay Fry. Now, Jay Fry, if you don't know who he is essentially the guy who has been the mastermind behind a lot of the recent changes in IndyCar racing. A lot of the direction of where IndyCar is headed is a lot to do with Jay Fry. So if you like the direction that IndyCar is headed, a lot of the credit goes to Jay Fry. And if Jay Fry does leave IndyCar to go to NASCAR, I can hardly blame him, especially because of the fact that certainly NASCAR has more money. And there's certainly a potential to lay a bag of gold at Jay Fry's feet to bring him into the NASCAR fold of things and see if he can kind of right the ship. Certainly, we knew and were well aware that Jim France, who is currently in the role, the chairman of the IMSA series, which is also owned by the NASCAR family or the France family, he's not particularly interested in running NASCAR day to day. So if Brian can't do it and Jim doesn't want to, there's really not a whole lot of people immediately who can fill that role. Now, certainly people have been talking about Ben Kennedy, a former NASCAR driver himself and part of the France family, as someone who could step into that role. But at the moment, he's only being groomed for that. He's only been on the business side of things, I think, for a year and a half at this point. It hasn't been very long. So someone in the interim, like a Jay Fry, would be a fantastic move for NASCAR because of, well, just look at his track record here. When you look at IndyCar, look what they have done. A lot of what they have done in terms of the ideas moving forward have been to almost go back into the past. You hear a lot of NASCAR fans talking about getting rid of the splitter, going back to getting rid of the tapered spacer, going back to a valance on the front of the cars, maybe going back to a better stock look for the cars. A lot of that sounds very familiar what we were talking about in IndyCar racing 2 or 3 years ago. The cars almost became sports car-like with so much bodywork on them and so much downforce that the racing suffered as a result. So what does Jay Fry do in association with IndyCar and a lot of the people that they have working there? They go back to a spec body style which very much resembles the glory days of the sport. Now, would Jay Fry have the authority or would he have the vision going into NASCAR to do something like that? It remains to be seen. Again, a lot of this is speculation because we simply don't know what's going to happen here. And it's not like Jay Fry doesn't have NASCAR credentials. He actually was one of the higher-ups in the Red Bull racing team, which ran in NASCAR from 2007 to 2011. So he knows the inner workings of NASCAR just as, if not better, than IndyCar. And he was also there, if you think about the 2007 to 2011 era for NASCAR, you could probably argue that a lot of the mistakes that a lot of fans are upset about were made in that era. You have to assume, with Jay Fry being there, that he would have seen them and be able to identify them and how to fix them going forward. But back to Brian France for just a second, and I'll wrap it up here. I'm really disappointed that it seems like this move, certainly to me, doesn't show a lot of remorse, and it doesn't show accountability or responsibility for the actions. And one of the things that I was very upset about is, again, NASCAR is a driving sport, and having the CEO show such irresponsibility, allegedly, behind the wheel is very unfortunate. And it's very unfortunate that that this is taking place and that we're talking about stuff like this instead of talking about more positive things. Now, are there some positives that could come out of this? Absolutely. But if it's me and I'm looking at this situation, I fully expect to see Brian France not paying very much for his alleged actions in this case. I see him bringing in a big team of New York City lawyers and tearing up the town in this little town, county, municipality, whatever you want to call it, of New York, and, leaving with not a whole lot of black marks in the eyes of the law on his record, and he may well be welcomed right back in to NASCAR management, and it'll almost be as if none of this happened. So we'll have to see how it all plays out. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this whole situation, and again, it's a shame. This whole situation has just been a big shame. And let me know what you think about the Jay Fry rumors. That's the only way I could see him ever since the rumor began at the Indianapolis. Could he be the guy that NASCAR is pursuing? Can they get him? Do you think they could pull him away from IndyCar? That would be interesting, and that might ruffle some feathers on the social media platforms. We'll just have to wait and see. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next video.